The Mongol army, led by Genghis Khan and his successors, became famous not only for its military might, but also for its unique system of administration and logistics. Across the vast expanses of Eurasia, their campaigns would have been impossible without a well-organized supply infrastructure. The Mongols' logistics included advanced methods for their time of resource management, transportation, and interaction with conquered territories. So how did armies made up mostly of mounted archers maintain their mobility, feed themselves, and get supplied with weapons for months or even years? In our video on the Amazing History channel, we will look at how the Mongols managed to create one of the best and most successful military machines in history. Subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the bell to get notifications about new episodes. We would also appreciate your support through sponsorship, and we are grateful to those who are already doing so. Well, I won't keep you waiting. Let's get to the topic of this episode. The nomadic lifestyle became the perfect school for acquiring logistics skills, which later gave the Mongol army unique advantages during their campaigns. From childhood, the Mongols learned to manage herds, sheep, goats, oxen, camels, and of course horses. These herds not only provided food, but were the foundation of their lives. They gave milk, meat, wool, leather, bones for tools, and much more. Seasonal migrations required careful planning from the nomads. It was necessary to take into account weather conditions, the state of the pastures, and their ability to recover in order to avoid resource depletion. Winter pastures were carefully preserved. There, the livestock could graze on their own by digging food out from under the snow. Mongolian horses played a leading role in this. They are short, hardy, and unpretentious animals. They were able to feed themselves even in harsh conditions, digging through the snow with their hooves. For example, sheep and goats would follow them, getting their food after the horses. The horse was of great importance to the Mongol. It served as transportation, a battle companion, and a source of milk and, in extreme cases, food. It was thanks to these animals that the Mongols were able to move quickly over vast distances, rely minimally on external supplies, and adapt to different conditions. Knowledge of nature and the ability to maintain a balance between the number of animals and resources, as well as constant readiness to move, made the Mongols masters of logistics. During military campaigns, their armies resembled giant nomadic communities, where every warrior was at the same time a herdsman, a craftsman, and a fighter. Such self-sufficiency turned them into one of the most mobile and effective armies in history. The Mongols, as nomads, skillfully used the resources of the steppes. This made their army incredibly self-sufficient and flexible. Their livestock, including horses, sheep, and goats, fed exclusively on grass, which freed the Mongol army from the need for complex and expensive supplies of grain or hay, as was required for the larger horses of sedentary societies. Each warrior usually had several horses, typically from 3 to 6, which he rotated to avoid overburdening a single animal. This allowed the army to move with incredible speed while remaining ready for battle. At the same time, less mobile types of livestock such as sheep and goats usually stayed in the rear, where they were used as a source of food and materials. These herds were part of the base camp known as the Orda, which served as the army's supply center. The Orda moved slowly, accompanied by wagons, oxen, and the families of nomads. It was often led by the wives of khans or military commanders, who managed the camp in the absence of the commanders-in-chief. The main forces operated far ahead of the Orda, conducting reconnaissance and swift attacks. Such a structure provided the army with incredible mobility, allowing them to conduct long campaigns without having to rely on external supplies. Such autonomy made the Mongol army virtually invincible on the open expanses of Eurasia. The Mongols skillfully organized the army's supply during campaigns, relying on simple but nutritious food and the rational use of resources. Each group of 10 men, called an arban, stocked up in advance on dried meat, dairy products, and other long-lasting foods. Among them were dried strips of meat, hard dairy curd, and special types of cheese. These foods were easy to transport, did not spoil on the road, and provided the necessary energy for long campaigns. The spare horses that the Mongols took with them served not only as replacement animals, but also as a source of food. Mares were especially valued because their milk could be used to make kumis or drunk raw, and if necessary, they would pierce a vein to obtain nourishing blood. In extreme cases, when a horse died, its meat was processed right on the spot to prepare simple dishes. The bones were used to make a rich broth known as shulin, which was often thickened with millet, meat, and available vegetables. Nothing went to waste, and in many sources the Mongols' willingness to eat anything is often noted with disgust. In addition, the Mongols were actively engaged in hunting. They hunted large game, birds, or small animals such as marmots. Such raids not only replenished supplies, these supplies allowed the warriors to practice archery, improving their combat skills. The logistics of the Mongol army became more complicated as they advanced deeper into foreign territories, where there were fewer pastures and the enemy's resources were limited. To deal with this problem, the Mongols used a predatory foraging strategy. Their troops spread out across rural areas, using both natural pastures and grain from local storehouses. At the same time, the warriors fed on food taken from the local population, including the peasants' harvest. This strategy not only supplied the army with provisions, but also destroyed the enemy's economy, forcing peasants to flee en masse to the cities and depleting the defenders' resources. In addition, chaos intensified. Rumors about numerous detachments appearing everywhere exaggerated the real size of their army. This created a myth about their incredible speed of movement. In reality, their speed depended on the terrain and the route. For example, Batu and Subutai during the Western campaign in the 1230s covered about 3,500 kilometers in 6 months, with an average speed of about 27 kilometers per day. This was the maximum that the Mongol army could achieve on steppe horses under ideal conditions. However, such conditions were rare. For example, Hulagu's campaign in Iran in the 1250s was much slower. On one section, he covered about 15 kilometers per day, and in hard-to-reach regions, the speed dropped to 6 to 9 kilometers per day. Hulagu often made long stops to allow the horses to graze, rest, and recover their strength. His army, which included up to 150,000 men, was more diverse in composition than the original army of Genghis Khan, and a significant part of it consisted of allied troops, which also slowed down the advance. Since we mentioned the allied troops, it should be added that they included steppe Turkic tribes, Khitans, Jurchens, Tanguts, and northern Chinese. Engineers and craftsmen played an especially important role, as they enabled the construction of bridges, roads, and siege machines. Such diversity made it impossible for the army to subsist exclusively on mare's milk and blood. Centralized logistics of the Mongol Empire were used to support such large-scale campaigns. For example, the great Khan Monke ordered supply depots to be established in advance along the route of his brother Hulagu's army. These depots stored huge supplies of flour, wine, and other products collected from across the entire territory of the empire. The horses were provided with pastures that were cleared and left fallow in advance. In addition, roads along the army's route were improved, bridges were repaired, and ferries were prepared. Vassals and governors in the areas where the army passed were tasked with organizing additional supplies so that the army could advance without stopping. Hulagu carefully chose the timing of his campaigns to avoid the summer heat and to make the most of the availability of pastures for the livestock. This well-thought-out organization allowed the Mongol army to maintain mobility and high combat effectiveness even in remote territories, demonstrating how effectively they combined nomadic traditions with centralized management. By the time of the great campaigns, the Mongols could no longer rely solely on the resources provided by the steppe, and they needed centralized supply. Unlike the early raids, large-scale campaigns such as the campaigns of Hulagu were carried out without the accompaniment of families. Even Hulagu himself could not take his wives with him, and most of them arrived in the Ilkhanate only in the late 1260s, years after his death in 1265. This highlights how difficult and lengthy such campaigns were. For the garrison stationed on the distant borders of the empire, separation from their families was part of official policy. Without the possibility of returning home, the warriors often took local wives, which led to their assimilation with local cultures. This contributed to the rapid mixing of Mongol garrisons with Turkic and Persian peoples in the western part of the empire. As a result, the Mongol presence in these regions became less apparent, and their cultural influence gradually weakened. These social and logistical changes were also reflected in the armament of Mongol warriors. It adapted to the new conditions and incorporated elements of local traditions, which made the empire's armies even more versatile. Every Mongol, in addition to war skills, was required to be able to make and maintain his own equipment, including bows, arrows, and saddles. However, the production of metal items such as arrowheads, swords, and armor required centralized and complex organization. At the beginning of the conquests, Mongolia did not have enough resources for mass production of metal weapons, and they relied heavily on imports from neighboring states. China, Central Asia, and Persia provided a huge amount of iron and steel, which allowed the Mongol army to be supplied with the necessary materials. For example, in China there were well-developed metallurgical centers that supplied the Mongols with weapons and ammunition. But only wealthy warriors could afford swords and metal armor. Therefore, the metal available at the beginning of the campaigns was more often used to make simple but effective types of weapons, such as spears and maces. As the empire expanded, the Mongols began actively integrating craftsmen from the conquered peoples. After each battle, the enemy's equipment was collected and redistributed within the army. This applied to both weapons and armor. For example, during the campaigns in Khwarezm and other regions, the Mongols captured and relocated blacksmiths and craftsmen so that they would work for the army. Such specialists settled in production centers like the city of Chinkai Balgasun, founded by the influential official Chinkai in western Mongolia. This city served not only as an arms factory but also provided the army with food and other necessary supplies. Special attention was given to the production of arrows. The Mongol army needed millions of arrowheads. And workshops like those in Karakorum played a key role in ensuring the combat readiness of the army. Production required great effort. One blacksmith could produce from 200 to 300 arrowheads a day using relatively simple forging techniques. In large workshops, this number increased due to the use of captured craftsmen and the division of labor. These items were cheap to produce and easy to transport, which made them the ideal weapon for Mongolian tactics. In addition to arrowheads, metal was used to create protective plates for horses and riders. Even simple metal elements such as rings for chainmail or rims for shields played an important role. In some cases, simpler materials like leather were reinforced with metal plates, creating effective and lightweight armor. Mongolian craftsmen also adapted captured weapons and techniques to suit their needs. For example, they could rework swords and spears into lighter and more compact forms, convenient for use in fast cavalry attacks. Arrowheads were designed in such a way as to easily pierce armor and also inflict serious wounds on the enemy or their horses. To supply the army during long campaigns, the Mongols organized mobile blacksmith workshops. These workshops accompanied the troops and used mobile forges to repair or manufacture arrows and other metal components right in the field. Despite this centralized system, mass production of swords and armor for all warriors was never a priority. Only the elite, especially the Khan's bodyguards, were provided with high-quality metal weapons and armor. Most warriors used captured equipment or made do with basic tools, including knives, bows, and simple leather protection. European travelers, such as William of Rubruck, noted that only a small part of the army was fully equipped with metal armor. This is evidence that the Mongol army remained extremely mobile, and its successes were based not on heavily armed units, but on strategic flexibility and mastery of archery. An important tool for the Khans was communication between their troops. For this purpose, they developed one of the most famous postal systems in history, the yam. Located on average about 30 to 40 kilometers apart, the Yam stations were like relay points stretching across the entire Mongol Empire. The communities where the Yam stations were located provided food, animals, and lodging for the couriers. The couriers carrying written or oral messages would ride furiously to each station. There they would replenish their supplies, rest, switch to fresh horses, and set off again to deliver the messages as quickly as possible. Each user of the system was given a credential tag, which was called Jera GRG in Mongolian and Peitsa in Chinese. It granted the bearer the right to have their orders carried out unconditionally in different parts of the empire. The highest form of such a passport was the gold Peitsa with a tiger's head, on which the name Chinggis Khan was engraved. The Peitsa also specified which goods or services were to be provided to the bearer. Most likely, Chinggis Khan learned about the system of postal stations from defectors from the Jin Empire. On the other hand, it could have arisen on its own as a response to the need to maintain order and governance in a rapidly growing empire. Regardless of its origin, Chinggis Khan recognized the necessity of such a system by the 1210s. During the 13th century, especially under Ugade and Munke, the Yam was significantly expanded. However, the system was sometimes disrupted and became a source of irritation for local residents who were forced to maintain the stations, as well as for officials and merchants who abused its privileges. In many territories of the empire, the Yam did not become widespread even during the height of the Great Khan's power. Nevertheless, it remained an important means of communication between the remote parts of the empire, helping to coordinate the actions of armies and administrations. Through the Yam system, it was possible to transmit orders, create schedules, and organize state events, such as censuses carried out by order of Munke. This same system made it possible to mobilize troops and supplies for major military campaigns. Thanks to the Yam stations, Kulagut was able to meet a large number of allied contingents and replenish food supplies without significant delays. When he reached the fortress of the assassins Maimundiz, the Yam system played a key role in coordinating actions. The troops sent from the Ulus of Yochi crossed the Caucasus and joined Kulagut's army in northern Iran. Thus, the combined forces were able to crush the fortified bastions of the assassins. And in conclusion, I want to say that the logistics of the Mongol Empire was a key factor that ensured its incredible mobility and success in conquests. The use of efficient postal systems, well-planned supply for the troops, mobile forges, and centralized resource management allowed the Mongols to support huge armies over long distances and in conditions of constant warfare. This combination of nomadic traditions with centralized organization played a crucial role in the Mongols' victories, allowing them not only to conquer new territories, but also to maintain stability within the empire. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.